Priya had always been the quiet one. At 34 years old, she had built her entire life around staying invisible. She worked as an accountant at a mid-sized company in the city, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names but nobody really knew each other. She arrived at 8 in the morning, sat at her desk in the corner, and spent her days buried in numbers and spreadsheets. By 5 o'clock, she was gone. Most of her coworkers wouldn't have been able to describe her if someone asked. She liked it that way. Or at least, that's what she told herself. Priya lived alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. She had a cat named Biscuit, a collection of second-hand books, and a routine that never changed. Wake up, go to work, come home, read, sleep. Weekends were for grocery shopping and long walks in the park where she wouldn't have to talk to anyone. It was a small life, but it was safe. And after everything she had been through, safe felt like enough. But there was something Priya never talked about. Something she had locked away so deep inside herself that even she had almost forgotten it existed. When she was a little girl, Priya used to sing. Not just hum along to the radio or whisper songs in the shower. She used to really sing. Her grandmother had been the one to discover it first. Priya was only 7 years old, sitting on the kitchen floor while her grandmother cooked dinner. Without thinking, she started singing an old folk song she had heard on the radio. Her grandmother stopped stirring the pot and turned around slowly. There were tears in her eyes. From that day on, singing became their secret. Every Sunday, Priya would visit her grandmother's small house at the edge of town. They would sit together in the kitchen, and Priya would sing while her grandmother listened with her eyes closed and a peaceful smile on her face. Those were the happiest moments of Priya's childhood. Her grandmother would always say the same thing when she finished. "Your voice is a gift, my child. One day, you will share it with the world." But that day never came. When Priya was 15, her grandmother passed away. The funeral was small and quiet, just like the woman herself. Priya stood by the grave long after everyone else had left, and she made a silent promise. She would keep their secret. She would hold on to those Sunday afternoons forever, locked away in a place where no one else could touch them. After that, Priya stopped singing. Not gradually, but completely. She closed that door and threw away the key. Music reminded her too much of loss, of love that was gone, of a time she could never get back. It was easier to stay silent. It was easier to become invisible. Years passed. Priya finished school, went to college, got a job. She moved through life like a ghost, always present but never quite there. People described her as shy, reserved, hard to read. They weren't wrong. Priya had become very good at keeping people at a distance. She smiled when she needed to, made small talk when required, and never let anyone get too close. Then came the talent show. Every year, her company organized a big event to boost morale. There were team-building activities, award ceremonies, and the highlight of the evening, a talent show where employees could perform for their coworkers. Most people treated it as a joke. Someone would do a bad magic trick. Someone else would tell terrible jokes. A group from marketing would perform a clumsy dance routine they had practiced for 2 days. It was all in good fun, and nobody took it seriously. Priya had never participated. She had never even attended. Every year, she found an excuse to leave early before the event started. Nobody noticed. And that was fine with her. But this year was different. It started as a joke in the break room. A group of coworkers were talking about the talent show, throwing out ridiculous ideas for acts. Someone suggested that the quietest person in the office should perform. Everyone laughed. Then someone looked at Priya, who was sitting alone at a table in the corner, eating her lunch, and reading a book like she always did. "Hey," they called out. "You should sign up for the talent show." Priya looked up, confused. She thought they were joking. She forced a small smile and shook her head. "No thanks," she said quietly, and went back to her book. But they didn't let it go. Over the next few days, the joke spread through the office. People started asking her about it. "What's your hidden talent? Come on. Everyone has something. It was all meant to be playful. But Priya felt her chest tighten every time someone brought it up. Then, one afternoon, she found her name on the sign-up sheet in the main hallway. Someone had written it there as a prank. Priya stared at it for a long moment, her heart pounding. She could cross it out. She could complain to her manager. She could pretend she never saw it. But she didn't do any of those things. Instead, she went back to her desk and sat there in silence, staring at her computer screen without seeing anything. Something strange was happening inside her. A feeling she hadn't experienced in almost 20 years. It started as a whisper, soft and uncertain. What if you did it? What if you finally stopped hiding? She shook her head and tried to focus on her work. The idea was ridiculous. She hadn't sung in front of anyone since her grandmother died. She didn't even know if she still could. Her voice was probably terrible by now. She would embarrass herself in front of the whole company. Everyone would laugh at her. But the whisper wouldn't go away. That night, Priya went home and sat on her bed with Biscuit curled up beside her. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about those Sunday afternoons in the kitchen, the smell of spices in the air, the warmth of being truly seen by someone who loved her. She thought about the promise she had made at the funeral, to keep their secret safe forever. But was that really what her grandmother would have wanted? Priya remembered her grandmother's words, the ones she had heard so many times as a child. Your voice is a gift, my child. One day, you will share it with the world. Maybe it was time. The next morning, Priya walked into the office with shaking hands and a racing heart. She went straight to the sign-up sheet in the hallway. Her name was still there, written in someone else's handwriting as a joke. She picked up the pen hanging from the board and stared at her name for a long moment. Then, slowly, she wrote next to it, Song. She put the pen down and walked away before she could change her mind. For the next 2 weeks, Priya lived in a state of quiet panic. She had not told anyone what she was planning to do. She had not practiced in front of a mirror or recorded herself on her phone. She simply carried the secret with her, the same way she had carried it for 20 years. At night, when she was alone in her apartment, she would sit by the window and hum quietly to herself. Old songs from her childhood. The folk melody her grandmother loved most. Her voice felt rusty at first, like a door that hadn't been opened in too long, but slowly, something began to loosen. The notes came easier. The melodies returned. She still didn't know if she could actually go through with it. Part of her hoped that something would happen to cancel the event. A fire alarm, a power outage, anything. But another part of her, a part she barely recognized anymore, wanted to be seen. Just once. Just for a moment. As the day of the talent show drew closer, Priya found herself thinking about her grandmother more than she had in years. She could almost hear her voice. Do not be afraid, my child. The world is waiting for you. Priya didn't know if that was true. She didn't know if anyone would care about a quiet accountant singing an old folk song. She had no expectations, no dreams of applause or recognition. She just wanted to keep a promise she had made a long time ago, to a woman who had believed in her when no one else did. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to believe in herself too. The day of the talent show arrived faster than Priya expected. She woke up that morning with a knot in her stomach that refused to go away. Outside her window, dark clouds were gathering over the city. A storm was coming. She wondered if it was a sign. She went through her morning routine like a robot. Shower, coffee, feed the cat, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Every few minutes, she would catch herself standing still in the middle of her apartment, staring at nothing, her heart beating too fast. What am I doing? The question played on repeat in her head. She had no business being on a stage. She was an accountant. She was invisible. That was who she was supposed to be. She opened her closet and looked at the simple black dress she had picked out for the evening. It was nothing special. She had bought it years ago for a cousin's wedding and hadn't worn it since. Next to it hung her work clothes, the same gray and beige outfits she wore every day. Safe colors, invisible colors. Tonight would be different. Tonight, people would look at her. The thought made her feel sick. At work, Priya couldn't concentrate on anything. She made mistakes on a simple spreadsheet. She forgot to reply to emails. During a meeting, someone had to say her name 3 times before she realized they were talking to her. Her coworkers probably thought she was coming down with something. In a way, she was. She was coming down with fear. By late afternoon, the office started buzzing with excitement about the talent show. People were talking about what they were going to perform. Someone from the IT department had been practicing a magic trick for weeks. A group from Human Resources had prepared a comedy skit. 2 women from the design team were going to do a dance routine to a popular song. Priya listened to all of this from her corner desk, feeling smaller and smaller with every word. These people had practiced. They had costumes and props, and backup plans. They had friends who would cheer for them no matter what. What did she have? An old folk song that nobody had ever heard. A voice that hadn't performed in 20 years. And absolutely no one in the audience who was waiting for her. She thought about backing out. It wasn't too late. She could tell the organizers she was feeling unwell. She could simply go home and pretend none of this had ever happened. Tomorrow, everything would go back to normal. People would forget about the joke. She would go back to being invisible. But every time she reached for her phone to send that message, something stopped her. A voice in the back of her mind that sounded a lot like her grandmother. "You made a promise," it whispered. "Are you going to break it now?" The talent show was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock in the company's main auditorium. By 6:30, the room was already filling up with people. Priya stood outside the door, watching her coworkers stream in with drinks and snacks, laughing and chatting like this was the most exciting night of the year. For them, it probably was. A fun break from the routine. A chance to see their colleagues make fools of themselves in a harmless way. For Priya, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. She finally forced herself to go inside and made her way backstage, where the performers were gathering. The space was small and crowded, full of nervous energy and last-minute preparations. Someone was practicing card tricks in the corner. A group was going over their dance steps one more time. Another person was warming up their voice with strange sounds that made everyone laugh. Priya found a quiet spot near the back and tried to make herself small. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere near a stage. What had she been thinking? A woman with a clipboard approached her. She was one of the organizers, cheerful and efficient. "You're Priya, right? The one doing the song?" Priya nodded, unable to find her voice. "Great. You're number 8 on the list. Should be about 45 minutes from now. Good luck out there." And then she was gone, moving on to the next performer. 45 minutes. Priya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. 45 minutes until she had to walk out there and sing in front of 200 people who didn't know her name. 200 people who would stare at her, judge her, maybe laugh at her. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. The show began, and Priya watched from the wings as performer after performer took the stage. The magic trick went well, even though everyone could see how the cards were hidden. The comedy skit got huge laughs, mostly because it made fun of the company's terrible coffee machine. The dance routine was messy but energetic, and the audience cheered anyway. Everyone was having fun. Everyone belonged up there. Priya did not feel like she belonged anywhere. As the performances continued, her panic grew. Her hands were shaking. Her mouth was dry. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, like it was trying to escape. Every instinct told her to run. Just leave. Go home. Forget this ever happened. But she stayed frozen in place, watching the stage lights glow in the darkness, listening to the applause that came after each act. Number 6 performed a stand-up comedy routine that bombed halfway through. The silence was painful. Priya watched the poor man struggle to finish his jokes. His face red with embarrassment. A few polite claps followed him off stage. That could be me, she thought. That will be me. Number 7 was a young man who played guitar and sang a popular love song. He was good. Really good. The audience swayed along, and some people even sang the chorus with him. When he finished, the applause was loud and genuine. Priya felt her stomach drop. How was she supposed to follow that? She didn't have a guitar. She didn't know any popular songs. All she had was an old melody that nobody in this room had ever heard, sung in a language half of them wouldn't understand. This was a mistake. This was a terrible, horrible mistake. The organizer appeared beside her again. "You're up next. Ready?" "No," Priya wanted to say. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready. Please let me go home." But the word that came out of her mouth was different. "Yes," she heard herself whisper. "Yes. I'm ready." She didn't know where that word came from. It felt like someone else had said it. Someone braver than her. Someone who still believed that promises were meant to be kept. The young man with the guitar walked off stage to cheers and whistles. The host stepped up to the microphone, thanking him for the wonderful performance. Then he glanced at his notes and smiled. "Our next performer is someone we don't hear from very often," he said. "Please welcome to the stage, Priya from accounting." There was a smattering of polite applause, a few confused looks. Most people in the audience probably had no idea who she was. Priya stepped out of the wings and into the light. The stage felt enormous. The spotlight was blinding. She couldn't see faces, only shadows and shapes in the darkness beyond. Her legs felt like they were made of stone. Each step toward the microphone took all the strength she had. She reached the center of the stage and stood there, alone. The room fell quiet. 200 people were looking at her, waiting for something to happen. She could feel their eyes on her, their curiosity, their mild interest that would quickly turn to boredom or pity if she didn't deliver. Priya opened her mouth to sing. Nothing came out. Her throat had closed up completely. The song was gone. The melody she had been humming for weeks had vanished from her mind like smoke. All she could feel was the terror, the crushing weight of all those eyes, the certainty that she had made the worst decision of her life. The silence stretched on. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Someone in the audience coughed. A few people shifted in their seats. Priya stood there in the spotlight, paralyzed, feeling the dream she had carried for 20 years, crumbling into dust. And then, in the darkest moment of her life, she heard her grandmother's voice. It came from somewhere deep inside her memory. Warm and gentle and impossibly real. "Close your eyes, my child. Do not think about them. Think about me. Think about our kitchen. Think about Sunday." Priya closed her eyes, and everything changed. With her eyes closed, the world became smaller. The audience disappeared. The stage lights faded. The weight of 200 staring faces melted away into nothing. All that remained was darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, a memory. Priya was 7 years old again, sitting on the cool tile floor of her grandmother's kitchen. The evening sun was streaming through the window, painting everything in shades of gold. Her grandmother stood at the stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled like home. The old radio in the corner was playing a folk song, one of those ancient melodies that seemed to come from another time entirely. And Priya was singing. She could feel it now. That same feeling from all those years ago. The way the music had moved through her without effort. Like water flowing downhill. She hadn't been trying to impress anyone. She hadn't been worried about hitting the right notes or sounding good. She had simply opened her mouth and let the song out. Her grandmother had turned around with tears in her eyes. That was the first time Priya understood that her voice could make someone feel something. Standing on that stage, with her eyes still closed and her heart still pounding, Priya stopped trying to perform. She stopped thinking about the audience, about the judges, about all the ways this could go wrong. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about Sunday afternoons and jasmine tea and the creak of the old wooden chair, and then she began to sing. The first note was barely a whisper. It trembled in the air like a candle flame in the wind, fragile and uncertain. Priya almost stopped right there. The note sounded thin and weak, nothing like the voice she remembered having as a child. But she kept going. The second note was stronger. The third one, stronger still. With each passing moment, something inside her began to open. It was like a door that had been locked for 20 years, was finally swinging wide. The rust fell away, the hinges loosened, and behind that door was something she had almost forgotten existed, her voice. The melody poured out of her now, filling the auditorium with a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the stage. It was the old folk song her grandmother had loved most, the one they used to sing together on those Sunday afternoons. The words were in her grandmother's native language, and Priya sang them exactly the way she had learned them as a child, with all the longing and sorrow and hope woven into every syllable. She forgot where she was. She forgot who was watching. She forgot that she was supposed to be afraid. There was only the song, and the memory, and the feeling of her grandmother's presence wrapping around her like a warm blanket. In the audience, something strange was happening. People who had been checking their phones put them down. Conversations that had been happening in whispers went silent. The restless energy that always filled a room during a long event seemed to drain away completely. Everyone was still. Everyone was listening. A woman in the third row felt her breath catch in her throat. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling behind them. It reminded her of her own mother, who had passed away 2 years ago. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. A man near the back of the room had been planning to leave early. He had a dinner reservation across town and was only staying out of obligation. But when Priya started singing, he found himself frozen in his seat. The song reached into his chest and grabbed hold of something he had buried long ago. He couldn't have moved if he wanted to. Even the host, standing off to the side with his notes and his microphone, felt his professional smile fade into something more genuine. In 15 years of hosting these events, he had never heard anything like this. He had never seen an audience react this way. Priya's voice rose and fell with the melody, sometimes soft as a lullaby, sometimes powerful enough to fill every corner of the room. There was pain in it. There was loss. But there was also love. So much love that it seemed to overflow and spill out into the air. She was not performing anymore. She was remembering. She was honoring. She was keeping a promise she had made to a woman who had seen something in her that she couldn't see in herself. The song had 3 verses. By the second verse, half the audience was in tears. People who didn't cry easily were wiping their eyes and looking around in confusion, wondering what was happening to them. Strangers sitting next to each other exchanged glances, sharing a moment of connection that none of them had expected. This wasn't supposed to be emotional. This was a company talent show. This was supposed to be awkward magic tricks and bad karaoke. Nobody had signed up for this. Nobody had prepared to feel their hearts break open on a random Thursday evening. But that was exactly what was happening. Priya moved into the final verse, and her voice climbed higher than it had gone before. The notes hung in the air like stars, bright and impossibly beautiful. She poured everything she had into those last few lines. All the years of silence, all the grief she had carried, all the love she still felt for a grandmother who had been gone for almost 2 decades. And then, the song ended. The last note faded slowly, like the final rays of sunlight disappearing below the horizon. Priya stood there with her eyes still closed, breathing hard, feeling like she had just run a marathon. Her whole body was trembling. She wasn't sure her legs would hold her up much longer. For one terrible moment, there was complete silence. Priya's heart stopped. She had done it. She had actually done it. But now the fear came rushing back, twice as strong as before. What if they hated it? What if they didn't understand? What if she had just embarrassed herself in front of everyone she worked with? She opened her eyes. What she saw made no sense at first. People were standing. Not just a few people. Everyone. The entire audience was on their feet, and they were clapping so hard it sounded like thunder. Some of them were crying openly. Others were cheering. A few were just staring at her with their mouths open, like they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The applause washed over her in waves. It was loud, so loud that she couldn't hear herself think. It seemed to go on forever, rising and falling and rising again, filling every inch of the auditorium with sound. Priya stood frozen in the spotlight, unable to move, unable to speak. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had expected polite clapping at best. She had expected confused silence. She had expected to walk off that stage and go back to being invisible. But these people weren't giving her polite applause. They were giving her everything they had. A man in the front row was shouting something she couldn't hear. A woman was pointing at her and saying something to the person next to her face still wet with tears. The host was walking toward her with a huge smile on his face, clapping along with everyone else. Priya felt something crack inside her chest. It wasn't a bad feeling. It was like a wall coming down. A barrier she had built around herself 20 years ago, finally crumbling to pieces. All those years of hiding, of staying quiet, of making herself small so nobody would notice her. All those years of keeping her grandmother's gift locked away in the dark. It was over now. She couldn't hide anymore. She didn't want to. The applause continued for what felt like forever. When it finally began to fade, the host reached her side and put a hand on her shoulder. He leaned into the microphone, but for a moment, he didn't say anything. Even he was struggling to find words. Well, he finally managed, his voice a little shaky. I think I speak for everyone here when I say, where have you been hiding? The audience laughed, but it was a warm laugh, full of affection and wonder. Priya looked out at all those faces, all those people who had been strangers to her just minutes ago. They weren't strangers anymore. Something had passed between them. Something real and true and impossible to explain. She had come here expecting nothing. She had come here ready to fail. Instead, she had found something she didn't even know she was looking for, a place where she belonged. Priya walked off the stage in a daze. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her past the curtain and into the dim light of the backstage area. She could still hear the applause echoing behind her. But it sounded far away now, like it belonged to a dream she was slowly waking up from. She found a quiet corner and leaned against the wall, pressing her hand to her chest. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst. Her whole body was shaking. She couldn't tell if she wanted to laugh or cry or both. What just happened? The other performers were staring at her. The young man who had played guitar earlier walked over slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. That was incredible, he said. His voice was soft, almost reverent. I've been playing music for 10 years, and I've never seen an audience react like that. Who are you? Priya didn't know how to answer. She was still the same person she had been an hour ago. The quiet accountant from the corner desk. The woman who ate lunch alone and never spoke up in meetings. Nothing about her had changed, but everything felt different. One by one, the other performers came over to congratulate her. People who had barely noticed her existence before were now looking at her like she was someone worth knowing. They asked where she had learned to sing. They asked why she had never performed before. They asked if she had any training, any background in music, any explanation for what they had just witnessed. Priya answered their questions as best she could, but her mind was somewhere else. She kept thinking about her grandmother. She kept wondering if somehow, somewhere, the old woman was watching. She hoped she was. She hoped she was proud. The talent show continued, but Priya barely noticed. There were a few more performances after hers, but the energy in the room had shifted. Everyone was still thinking about what they had heard. The magic trick that followed her felt flat. The comedy routine fell silent in places where it should have gotten laughs. It wasn't that the other performers were bad. It was just that something extraordinary had happened, and nobody could quite move past it. Finally, the last act finished, and the host returned to the stage to announce the results. The judges had been deliberating for the past 20 minutes, he explained. But the decision had not been difficult. In fact, he said with a smile, it was the fastest decision we've ever made. Priya felt her stomach tighten. She hadn't even thought about winning. She hadn't entered this competition to win anything. She had done it for her grandmother. She had done it for herself. The idea of a prize hadn't crossed her mind once. But now, standing backstage with all the other performers, she realized that people were looking at her expectantly. They already knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The host opened the envelope slowly, drawing out the moment for dramatic effect. In third place, he announced, "We have our wonderful dance duo from the design team." Cheers and applause. The two women hurried onto the stage to collect their small trophy, beaming with pride. In second place, the host continued, "We have our talented guitarist, who made us all fall in love tonight." More applause. The young man with the guitar walked out, waving to the crowd with a humble smile. Priya's heart was pounding again. She could feel the eyes of everyone backstage on her. She could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her shoulders. And in first place, the host said, pausing for effect, by unanimous decision from all three judges, we have someone who reminded us all why music matters. Someone who shared a piece of her heart with us tonight and changed the way we see her forever. He looked toward the backstage area, his smile warm and genuine. Priya from accounting. The applause that erupted was even louder than before. People were on their feet again, cheering and whistling and clapping with everything they had. Someone backstage gave Priya a gentle push toward the curtain, and suddenly she was walking out into the light again. The stage felt different this time. The spotlight didn't feel harsh anymore. It felt warm. The audience didn't feel like strangers. They felt like friends. The host handed her a small trophy and shook her hand. But the trophy wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the way people were looking at her. Not with pity or confusion or indifference. With admiration, with respect, with something that looked a lot like love. Priya held the trophy in her hands and looked out at the crowd. She saw her manager in the front row, a woman known for being tough and unemotional, wiping tears from her eyes. She saw coworkers she had worked beside for years finally seeing her for the first time. She saw people she didn't even recognize smiling at her like they had known her forever. Thank you, Priya said into the microphone. Her voice was shaky, but she didn't care anymore. I didn't expect any of this. I just wanted to sing a song that meant something to me, a song my grandmother taught me a long time ago. She paused, feeling the emotions rising in her chest. She always told me that my voice was a gift, Priya continued. She said that one day I would share it with the world. I never believed her. I was too afraid. I hid for a very long time. The room was completely silent now. Every single person was hanging on her words. But tonight, Priya said, her voice breaking slightly, I finally stopped hiding. And I think she would be happy about that. The applause that followed was different from before. It was softer, more personal. People weren't just celebrating a performance anymore. They were celebrating her. Her courage. Her journey. Her decision to finally step out of the shadows. After the ceremony ended, Priya was surrounded by people. Co-workers she had never spoken to before wanted to shake her hand. People from other departments introduced themselves and asked for her story. Everyone wanted to know about the song, about her grandmother, about why she had kept this talent hidden for so long. It was overwhelming. Priya had spent her entire adult life avoiding attention, and now she was drowning in it. Part of her wanted to escape, to go back to her quiet corner, and her invisible existence. But another part of her, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, wanted to stay right where she was. Her manager found her in the crowd and pulled her aside. The woman's eyes were still red from crying, something Priya had never seen before in 5 years of working together. I've known you for 5 years, her manager said quietly. 5 years. And I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything? Priya thought about the question for a moment. She thought about all the reasons she had given herself over the years. It was too personal. It hurt too much. Nobody would understand. She had made a promise, but standing there, still holding her little trophy, surrounded by people who finally saw her, she realized that none of those reasons made sense anymore. I was scared, she admitted. I thought if I shared it, I would lose it. I thought it only belonged to me and my grandmother. Her manager shook her head slowly. It doesn't only belong to you, she said. A gift like that belongs to everyone who gets to hear it. You owe it to them to share it. Priya didn't know what to say. She had never thought about it that way before. The night went on. People took photos with her. They asked for her contact information. They told her about open mic nights and local singing competitions and community events where she could perform again. For the first time in her life, Priya was being pulled into the world instead of fading away from it. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if this was the beginning of something new or just a single beautiful night that would fade into memory. But she knew one thing for certain: she was done hiding. As she finally left the building and stepped out into the cool night air, she looked up at the sky. The storm clouds had cleared, and the stars were shining brighter than she had seen them in years. Somewhere up there, her grandmother was watching. Priya smiled. "I did it," she whispered into the darkness. "I finally did it." And for the first time in 20 years, she felt truly free. Priya woke up the next morning to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, she thought something was wrong. Maybe there was an emergency at work. Maybe something had happened to someone in her family. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and squinted at the screen through sleepy eyes. What she saw made her sit straight up in bed. Hundreds of notifications. Messages from people she hadn't talked to in years. Friend requests from complete strangers. Her phone was lighting up so fast she couldn't keep track of what was happening. It took her several minutes to understand. Someone at the talent show had recorded her performance on their phone. They had posted it online late last night with a simple caption. "My coworker has been hiding this voice for years." Nobody knew. The video had been shared a few dozen times before Priya went to sleep. By the time she woke up, it had been shared thousands of times. By the end of that first day, it had been viewed over 500,000 times. Priya sat on her couch with biscuit in her lap, scrolling through comments from people all over the world. Most of them couldn't understand the words she was singing. But they didn't need to. The emotion came through clearly. People wrote about how the video had made them cry. They wrote about how it reminded them of their own grandmothers, their own hidden dreams, their own fears of being seen. One comment stuck with her more than the others. A woman from another country had written something simple. "I have been too afraid to share my art for 15 years. After watching this, I finally showed my paintings to my family. Thank you for being brave first." Priya read that comment over and over again. She had never thought of herself as brave. She had spent most of her life being the opposite of brave, but somehow, without meaning to, she had given someone else permission to stop hiding too. The video kept spreading. Within a week, it had been viewed over 3 million times. News websites picked up the story. A local television station reached out for an interview. Talent agents and music producers started sending messages, asking if she had representation, asking if she was interested in recording professionally. Priya didn't know how to handle any of it. She was still going to work every day, still sitting at her corner desk, still doing the same spreadsheets she had always done. But now people recognized her in the hallways. They stopped her to say how much they loved the video. They asked when she was going to perform again. She didn't have answers for them. She didn't have answers for herself. One evening, about 2 weeks after the talent show, Priya went to visit her grandmother's grave. She hadn't been there in almost a year. Life had gotten busy, or at least that's what she told herself. The truth was that visiting always made her sad, and she had spent a long time avoiding sadness. But things were different now. She sat down on the grass beside the simple headstone and started talking. She told her grandmother about the talent show. She told her about the video and the millions of people who had watched it. She told her about the messages from strangers and the interview requests and the agents who wanted to sign her. And then she told her the truth. "I'm scared again," she admitted. "I was scared before I went on that stage. And I'm scared now. Everything is changing so fast. People want things from me. They have expectations. What if I can't live up to them? What if that night was the best I'll ever be? And everything after this is just disappointment?" She sat there in silence for a long time, watching the wind move through the trees. Her grandmother didn't answer. Of course, she never would again. But somehow, in the quiet of that cemetery, Priya felt something shift inside her. Her grandmother had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. The old woman had seen something in that little girl singing on the kitchen floor, something worth nurturing, something worth protecting. She had waited patiently for years, knowing that one day Priya would be ready to share her gift with the world. That day had finally come. And now, Priya had a choice to make. She could retreat back into her old life. She could ignore the messages and the opportunities. She could let the video fade into the background noise of the internet and go back to being invisible. It would be safe. It would be comfortable. It would be easy. Or she could keep going. Priya stood up slowly and looked at her grandmother's name carved into the stone. She thought about all the years she had wasted being afraid. She thought about the woman from another country who had finally shown her paintings to her family. She thought about everyone out there who was still hiding, still waiting for permission to be seen. Maybe her gift wasn't just the singing. Maybe her gift was showing people that it was never too late to start. She made her decision right there, standing in that cemetery with the evening light fading around her. She was going to keep going. Over the next few months, Priya's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She didn't quit her accounting job right away. She was too practical for that, and she needed time to figure out what this new chapter would look like. But she started saying yes to things she would have refused before. She performed at a local open mic night. Her hands shook the entire time, but she did it anyway. She recorded some of her grandmother's folk songs in a small studio and released them online. They weren't professionally produced, but people loved them anyway. She started teaching singing lessons on weekends to children in her neighborhood, most of them from families who couldn't afford expensive music schools. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. She wasn't performing in concert halls or signing record deals. But she was doing something that mattered to her. She was sharing the gift her grandmother had given her, and she was helping others find their own voices along the way. 1 year after the talent show, Priya performed again at the same company event. This time, she wasn't a surprise. People knew who she was now. They knew her story. When she walked onto that stage, the applause started before she even opened her mouth. She sang a different song this time. It was one she had written herself, about a little girl and her grandmother, about Sunday afternoons and jasmine tea, about hiding and fear, and finally finding the courage to be seen. The words were her own, but the melody carried echoes of all those old folk songs she had learned as a child. When she finished, she didn't feel the need to run away. She stood there in the spotlight and let the applause wash over her. She smiled at the faces in the crowd, many of them people she now called friends. After the show, a young woman approached her backstage. She was quiet and nervous, the kind of person who seemed uncomfortable taking up space. She reminded Priya of herself. "I've been too scared to do anything with my life," the young woman said. "I have all these dreams, but I keep telling myself I'm not good enough. That nobody wants to hear what I have to say." Priya looked at her for a long moment. She remembered feeling exactly the same way. She remembered thinking that her voice didn't matter, that she was better off staying invisible, that the world had no room for someone like her. She reached out and took the young woman's hand. "You are good enough," she said gently. "And someone out there is waiting to hear exactly what you have to say. You just have to be brave enough to say it." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly and whispered a thank you before disappearing into the crowd. Priya watched her go and felt something warm spread through her chest. This was why she had stopped hiding. Not for the views or the applause or the opportunities, but for moments like this, for the chance to tell someone else what her grandmother had once told her. Your voice is a gift. One day, you will share it with the world. And maybe, just maybe, that day is today.